All right, guys, I gotta admit it. I'm changing my position when it comes to Richard Allen and the Delphi case. Guys, we I think are now on day 8 of the trial. We'll be updating you on this video. But after hearing day after day what's going on in this case, what's going on in this trial, you guys have won me over. I got to give him the Kohlberger treatment and say, I don't know. Something seems really fishy here, and at the very least, there's no real evidence. I'm JB Gunner. This is Crime Time. Let's get on into this, man. I don't know about this Delphi situation at all.
Bring it back.
What's going on, everybody? As you guys know, I'm JB Gunner, and this is Crime Time. Now, before I get started, let me first and foremost say thank you to everybody that supports the channel. Hell, any of my channels, regardless of platform and regardless of method you choose, whether it's Cash App, Patreon, Venmo, PayPal. Truth is, guys, I couldn't do this each and every day as often as I do for the last 18 years if it wasn't for you. I appreciate every last one of you. And if you too find my content valuable, feel free to hit the links down below. Join the Gun Squad today. You can also find links to some other channels. I got a politics channel, news channel, gaming channel, fucking live stream channel. I got it all. Sorry, guys, I'm in the process of moving, doing my thing, but still a little sick as well. But we're going to go ahead and push forward because this is an update along with the Leilani Simon update, which I'll do a little bit later in the day. This is an update that really needs to have. Just to let you know, with the Leilani Simon case, they are doing closing arguments today. So Leilani Simon looks like it's about to be done. My opinion on her is she's 100% guilty. No doubt about it. In my opinion, Leilani Simon killed her child. But this case, now the thing with the Delphi case is I went back and forth. In the beginning, I said, nah, man, it's not Richard Allen. He came out of nowhere, right? And then I heard about the 63 confessions, and I said, you know, who the fuck would confess? And I heard all of you guys saying it's the white supremacists, the white people did it, and even though Richard Allen's also white. It can't be Richard Allen. It's got to be the white supremacists setting them up as they killing other white people. I said, nah, man, you guys are fucking retarded. You guys are, in fact, most of the symbols shown, they're not even Odinist symbols. They're not. And they do come from the heathen genre, I guess you could say. But they're not Odinist symbols. And so I've known that since the beginning, whether you were talking about the interlocked triangles, a lot of these things that you guys talk about, you talk from a complete ignorance. And so I just let it play itself out, though. I let you guys sit there and talk your shit, and laughed at you. However, I'm not switching to the Odinist thing. This case is the most fucked up case I've ever seen, even more fucked up than Brian Kohlberger. And the Brian Kohlberger case is really fucked up, but this case right here, man, let me show you guys some shit. Guys, the Delphi murder case, prosecutors fail to have witnesses identify Richard Allen as the man in video captured by girls in their last moments alive. So let me get this straight. There's 3 witnesses that saw Richard Allen or saw a bridge guy on the bridge. They're looking right at Richard Allen in the courtroom, and they can't say for sure he's the guy. Because if you remember all 3 witnesses, in fact, I'm going to show you, things got really testy between a witness because they changed the story so many times. This is what started to convince me. So let me get this straight. They're in the courtroom with Richard Allen. They were on the bridge. They initially, when they made their description, they had the clothes all wrong, all of that. They're sitting in there with Richard Allen, and they say they can't definitively say this is bridge guy. So I want to make this clear to you. There is no one definitively pointing out Richard Allen as bridge guy. There is no DNA linking Richard Allen to this case. There is no absolute proof that the bullet is definitively matched to only Richard Allen's gun. The only thing we have in this entire Delphi case is the 63 confessions, which, by the way, in these confessions, he said that he shot the girls. He also confessed to killing grandchildren of his. This isn't... Also, during this case, they have lost interview, DNA evidence. They've lost it all. This is the biggest case probably in Indiana history since, like, John Dillinger and shit. You're telling me the biggest case in Delphi history, in Deer Creek history, they've lost all the evidence, including the interviews? Some of the interviews. You can't make this shit up. And the witnesses can't even point him out and say, yeah, that's the motherfucker I saw on the bridge. You cannot make this shit up. Jurors in the trial. In fact, let me see what this is. Richard Allen shows shocking behavior. How so? Let's see. When was that article written? Oh, that's October 22nd. Oh, yeah, we'll check this out. We'll check this out here in just a second as well. Jurors in the trial of Delphi murder accused Richard Allen have been given their first glimpse of the bridge guy as prosecutors played the haunting video. By the way, it was more. It was 41 seconds. So we did get to hear more. That after he said, guys down the hill, the girls were like, there's no path here. But anyway, we'll continue. As prosecutors played the haunting video recorded on Libby German's cell phone, capturing the last documented moments of her and her best friend Abigail Williams' lives. By the way, you know what confirmed my change of opinion? Because I was watching court TV and that motherfucker Gray Hughes was on there, and anything that Gray Hughes thinks happened, I always pick the opposite. Because Gray Hughes does nothing but bootlick the police. That's all he does. That's all he ever will do. He does nothing creative. He just takes the initial story from the police and then adds his commentary to it. That's pretty much it. I get it. He does a lot of little things. He puts little pins on the Google Maps and shit like that. Makes himself look real put together. But all of that work that he does is, and if you don't believe me, name one case, just one, where Gray Hughes went against the police narrative. There is no investigates, motherfucker. You just look at what the police said and said, yeah, that's how it happened. Do you see my point? And if I'm wrong, I invite any of you to name me one case where he didn't go word for word exactly what the PCA and the police said. Just one. Just one. One case. In the footage, 41 seconds long, Libby, who reached the end of the Monon High Bridge ahead of her friend, turns to Abby as she picks her way carefully over the structure's rotten timbers and gaps. Caught in the frame several feet behind the team is a man dressed in a blue jacket, which we know, jeans and hat. His hands are in his pockets, his chin tucked down so his face isn't visible beneath the hat. And I don't believe this is Richard Allen, I'm going to be honest. He is a little more than a sinister blur as he moves with purpose behind her. Here's the thing. In the video, and it's been regularly talked about, when he says, guys down the hill, nobody sees his mouth move. How do we know that audio is not overlaid over it? Or how do we know there's not a second person here? Because guess what? It was also confirmed that there was potentially two different knives, two different weapons used in the killings. Let that sink in. You think Richard Allen's just walking around like Leonardo from the Ninja Turtles and shit with multiple knives and shit and a gun? He says he's got the gun, he pulls it out, and then he's got two knives and he's flipping them around and just carving little motherfuckers up. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. So let's continue. Let's continue because we got a lot of shit going on here. Let me get past these pictures. As Abby reaches the end, Libby's cell phone lens drops the focus on the gravel at the girl's feet. She appears to cast about, talking in the steep slope to their left and the track which simply disappears before them. One of the girls can be heard saying, there's no path, so we have to go down here. See, the trail ends here. So what's that? As prosecutor Nick McClellan pointed out in his opening statement, once the girls were across the bridge, there was no escape at all. That's what they're saying. And I believe the bridge guy killed him, or was part of a duo or group that killed him. 3 separate eyewitnesses confidently stated that they saw Bridge Guy and identified him from a screenshot of the video, but the descriptions each gave of a man that they saw was not wildly different from the video image. It was wildly different from the defendant. So it wasn't just different from the video image itself, it was completely different from the defendant. Riley Voorhees, who was 16 at the time, described seeing a man dressed in black boots, black shirt, black jeans, black jacket with a black hoodie pulled up over his hat, and a black mask pulled over his mouth and nose. Now look at this right here. Does that look like any of that? She described him as unfriendly and said that he made her feel unsettled as their paths crossed that afternoon. She remembered the man as muscular, 5'10", in his 20s or 30s. Keep in mind, this was 7 years ago. Richard Allen, I believe, is 54 right now. He would have been in his late 40s. And he's definitely not 5'10". Okay? Richard Allen's a tiny little motherfucker. Anyway, and conceded that her memory may have been altered by seeing the subsequent picture of Bridge Guy. Brianne Wilbur was next. She was with Voorhees that day. She too described seeing a youthful, muscular, tall man dressed in black. Before saying the moment she saw the picture of the Bridge Guy, she knew that was who she had seen. So keep in mind that until they saw the picture of Bridge Guy, they didn't have, their description was completely wrong. And this is even worse. Betsy Blair, she was the confrontational witness that I was talking about earlier. She said she saw a man standing out on Monon High Bridge. She was out for a regular fitness walk along the trails. When she saw him, it appeared like he was looking for someone. She said, I just felt like he wasn't looking for me. Okay, this is a different situation. She said, but she also described him as youthful with fluffy brown hair and in his 20s or 30s. Slight, gaunt, with closely cropped hair and barely 5 feet. Barely 5 feet. Now, there you go. Now, she called it, oh no, they're talking about, so slight, gaunt, with closely cropped hair. He doesn't have fluffy hair. He's barely 5 feet, they said. So I want you to understand that none of these people, their description looks like Richard Allen. Bradley O'Lenny was forced to concede that despite taking numerous swabs and samples from the crime scene and each victim, they found absolutely no DNA evidence either that linked Richard Allen to this crime. Now, what was Richard Allen's reaction? Richard Allen hugged his arms tightly across his chest, kneading them with his fingers. As in the court at Delphi was shown harrowing images of the double murders in which he stands accused. Gaunt and pale-eyed, Allen rocked slightly and appeared to self-soothe with the repetitive act. It was the only hint that viewing the horrific photographs may have evoked some kind of stress or emotion. Yeah, anybody that saw little children looking like that would be stressed. Yesterday, family members and jurors sat through an avalanche of photographs. This includes the brutalized bodies, the autopsy photos. We had one of them that was butt naked. The other one was dressed in the other one's clothes, which none of that shit makes sense. It was the first time the court was forced to come face to face with the reality of the violent acts. And it seemed, like I said, to even kind of bother Richard Allen a little bit. There was 42 crime pictures shown. Autopsy in Delphi murders trial shocks jury as girl's cause of death is revealed for the first time. Of course, they had their throats slit. There's 2 little girls right there. It was brutal. Abby sustained just one cut, 5 6 centimeters in length and less than an inch deep. It ran right to left and was deep enough to partially cut her jugular vein, meaning her death would not have been quick. The doctor estimated it would have taken the 13-year-old 5 to 10 minutes to bleed out. Jesus Christ, that's horrible. Oh, man. Oh, man. He told the court she would have felt pain before going into fight or flight mode and panic setting in. Her heart rate and her blood pressure would rise and her breathing would become more rapid. The bleeding, he said, be passive as no arteries were injured. He said it's going to take some time before you lose enough blood. The onset of shock. From there, he told the hushed courtroom organs would start to fail and consciousness would be lost. She was not dead immediately. Libby's wounds, however, was more severe and also made for distressing viewing. On first glance, it appeared the 14-year-old had 3 deep slashes to her throat, to the left, and center and right. In fact, Kaur testified she had sustained 4 or 5 deep cuts, as at least one of the wounds showed evidence of overlapping cutting. Goddamn, that hurts. The slashes partially severed Libby's left carotid artery and fully severed both her right carotid artery and her jugular vein. She would have bled more quickly than her friend, but her death was not instantaneous either, as the swelling in her brain was evidence of more protracted death. Man. Oh, man. By the way, there was no sexual trauma. There was no sexual activity that occurred. There was test that was taken. Libby's hands were covered in blood, suggesting the doctor said she might have been desperately trying to stem the bleeding in her neck. Makes the most sense. Oh, man. Oh, man. Now, Sarah Carball, that is the juror. I mean, that is the witness that, unfortunately, was very combative. She's the one that said she told the courts that she saw a bloody and muddy man fitting the prescribed description walking away from the high trail around 4 p.m. that day. She said she looked at him as she drove in the opposite direction, but he did not make eye contact with her. When challenged over the consistency of her recollection, transcripts of her 3 interviews with law enforcement show she did not mention blood until 2019 interview. She insisted, no, I've always said blood. I've always said mud. No, the transcripts showed all she said. The first 2 interviews was mud. And then 2 years later, she added blood. She argued that she may have mumbled during her first interview and pointed to the fact there was more of an hour of video of her second interview that had been lost, right? In an increasingly ill-tempered exchange with defense attorney Andrew Baldwin, Carball snapped, I saw a bridge man walking along the road. He was covered in mud and blood, and that's that. She was one of them. This is when you know a motherfucker, a hit dog hollers, man. Forensic digital examiner took the stand to tell the jury what information could be gleaned from Libby's cell phone, which was recovered. She took the video of Bridge Guy at 2:13 p.m. There was a failed attempt to open the phone using biometric data and fingerprint at 2:14 p.m. At 2:18 p.m., information retrieved from Apple Health app showed the phone had stopped moving. So basically 4 minutes down the hill, probably. Started moving again, though, at 2:25, and then it stopped moving for the last time at 2:32. So got him walking around. During that time, it covered 50.64 meters and had an elevation change, which could have been either up or down. More than likely, obviously, down the hill. More than 2 hours after the last known movement of the phone, a frantic message from Libby's grandmother, Becky Patty, this was at 4:30 something, says, you need to call me right now. Of course, looking for him. There was no activity of any kind of recorded from that moment until 4:33 a.m. when 15 messages and numerous face call attempts. It's kind of weird how the phone just shut off all that time. You know what I'm saying? Cecil conceded he did not know if the health app would register a movement if the phone was in a car. So there's a lot of things going on here, and I think in a lot of ways this proves that they were never removed from the scene. I mean, it could be possible, but I doubt it. So I'm gonna be honest. Let's just go back over everything. Let's go back over everything. Let's go back over everything from opening statements to where we are now. Let's go back over everything, and I'm going to point out to you why my opinion has changed. Well, you've heard a lot of it right there. You've heard a lot of this. And I want you to understand, the confession letter. I want you guys to see this, okay? This is a recreation of the confession letter. This clear to me. This dude, if this was from him, like he was going through a mental lapse. Man, our children write better than this. Am I right? You understand that this looks like a fucking first grader wrote this. I'm really concerned that they might have been right. His mind may have been deteriorated by this point. And I don't know if these confessions are going to be admissible. Not really. Not really, I mean, I guess they are already there. But I think that with no other evidence, ultimately, this jury has to consider the possibility that these confessions are just bullshit. But let's take a look here.
Is your news now.
It's a day more than 7 years in the making, and it's the first day of the Delphi murders trial. Thanks for joining us.
We're going to go back to opening statements, and we're going to go day by day.
Tonight, opening statements and the first witnesses took the stand today inside a Carroll County courtroom.
We're going to go through all this.
McQuaid was there, and he brings us this late update.
The families of Abby Williams and Libby German arrived just before 8 a.m. And Allen's family is there too, as a dozen jurors and 4 alternates listened to opening statements of the state and the defense. Prosecutor Nicholas McLeland went first and over the course of 20 minutes told jurors that Richard Allen is Bridge Guy, the man who stalked Libby and Abby on the bridge.
I don't know, man. He looks taller than Richard Allen. I'm not going to lie. And I still believe he does look a lot like fucking Ron Logan. I truly believe this.
Bridge that day, whose image...
Think about it. Think about the bridge. The type of person that would be comfortable going off trail and gay guys get down that hill would be someone that owns the property. Do you see what I'm saying? There was big brush, high brush. Dude, this was an area that it's not like it was marked by trails. And Fox 59, I believe, went out there and did a little video. And this was a area where you almost would have to bushwhack through. You want me to believe that some non-criminal, no history, some CVS worker, family man, did all this? No, to me, it would make sense that someone that owned the property would know what they're doing. Look, man, I'm a hiker. And I know I don't go off trail for any fucking reason. You expect me to believe this guy, Richard Allen, was confident enough in his physical ability to tell the girl at 47 years old, to tell the girls, hey man, down that hill where there's no trail, no nothing, they said it was very steep. Come on, man, I'm struggling with this.
Was captured on Libby's phone.
And once again, go back to the fact that there was potentially 2 weapons.
And he matches the description of a man seen on the Monon High Bridge in the minutes just before the girls were abducted.
I don't think he matches that description at all.
Allen has confessed, and he knew details that only the killer would know.
That confession doesn't show that so far. You need to show me that he knew details that only the killer would know. Because right now, all the details that's been released in his confessions are the exact opposite of what happened. Those girls were not shot.
And investigators found a bullet that matches Allen's gun at the site where the girls' bodies were discovered. Defense attorney Andrew Baldwin countered that the witness descriptions are inconsistent.
They were.
Allen suffered a mental health crisis that led to false confessions. The bullet testing was inconclusive, and that the girls were likely abducted on Monday afternoon, driven away from the bridge, killed elsewhere, and their bodies were placed not far from the banks of Deer Creek early Tuesday mornings.
Now, I don't agree with that. I do not agree that the girls were taken somewhere else. However, let me say something while we're here and we're dressed. Speaking of dressed, think of the time it would take for one man to do this. I want you to think about this. They went down at 2:13. Richard Allen had already seen, or whoever, bridge guy, had already seen multiple people on the bridge who can overlook all that area. He had no clue if people were still going to come on the bridge. Think about the logic in this. Richard Allen had already seen, or whoever, had seen multiple people on the bridge. So here he is walking the girls down off trail and going and having them get undressed. And I know they both got undressed because one was naked and one was wearing the other one's clothes. Think about the time this had to have taken. No screaming, no nothing. That's impossible. And I'm sorry, as one girl is getting her throat slit, you're telling me the other girl didn't say, fuck this, I'm out of here? Nah, man. No. I'm not rolling with this. This all sounds like bullshit. This all sounds like bullshit. The time it would take to get these girls down the hill, get them to strip everything, didn't get the other one to put the clothes on the other motherfucker. And meanwhile, not worry if anybody else is seeing them or nothing. Bro, that to me sounds like some people or a group of people that knows the area. And I get it, Richard Allen has lived there his entire life, but let me ask you this question as well. Richard Allen has been at that CBS forever. You're telling me none of them girls who all lived in Delphi was like, yeah, man, it's the dude that works at the CBS. He was a staple of the community. He worked at CBS for a very long time. Nobody was like, yeah, that's the CBS guy. The three witnesses that was on the stand, nobody was like, yeah, man, that's the CBS. And think about it, before even all this came out, nobody was like, yeah, man, it was the dude from CBS. Nobody? Come on, I live in a small town. It's probably the only CBS in Delphi. Do you see my point? Nobody? There was other witnesses that said they knew who Richard Allen was that wasn't on the bridge, that had seen him. And they were like, no, there's no way it could have been him. Not that guy. He's a staple of the community.
Several hours before they were found. Becky Patty told jurors that this
I'm not rolling with it.
police sought a DNA sample to be matched to a strand of hair found in Abby's hand at the crime
That's
scene.
another thing. There was another strand of hair in Abby's hand. That to me is defensive. And it does not belong to Richard Allen.
More than 7.5 years after the evidence was discovered, the defense says that's an example of a slipshod investigation.
Yeah. Of course it is.
And that was CBS 4's Russ McQuaid reporting. Now, it's important to remember the two young girls at the very center of all of this. Abby and Libby were best friends who went for a hike in Delphi and never made it home. They went to Delphi Community Middle School. Abby was in the school band and Libby loved sports. Both of them played softball and love to create art.
With the trial officially underway, we want to once again bring in our legal analyst, attorney John Tompkins. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
By the way, those
we
news
know
ladies
are
hot as shit.
Today. We heard from both the prosecution and the defense. So walk us through how significant these opening statements are and really shaping the jury's perception from the start.
Sure, they're especially important in what is going to be a long trial because they're ways to tell the jurors when each side wants them to tune in and pay special attention to what they think will either make the case or break the case.
Yep.
And was there anything in these opening statements, I know we've been covering this for years, was there anything that we learned during this that we didn't know before?
Well, we found out that the hair that was mentioned earlier in the week belongs to a female and possibly a relative of one of the victims.
A female and relative, possibly a relative of one of the victims. How do we know that? So the hair was tested, but we don't know, the court doesn't know who it was? Listen, I'm not the smartest man in the world, but I'm pretty sure a hair in the hand, the clenched hand, on the hands of someone that had just been murdered is an important piece of DNA evidence, especially considering you didn't find any Richard Allen DNA anywhere. I don't give a fuck if it was a woman or not. I don't give a fuck if it was a relative. We need to know who the fuck it was. Who the fuck his hair was on her fingers? Who? And why was it there? It could have been a coincidence, but this is a pretty important case. We need to make sure it's not a coincidence.
And we found out that it looks like the defense case is going to stress some maybe tower data and cell phone location data to show that Mr. Allen was not present.
And another huge part of this case we've been talking about.
And that would do it all. If Richard Allen, listen, if Richard Allen really left the scene at 2:30, and his phone shows he left the scene at 2:30, I want you to understand the ability for there to be time for all that other shit to happen it doesn't exist. Because you have to realize, look at the time her phone stopped and this and that, and when it showed her moving, you have to realize there was undressing, there was covering with sticks, there was all kinds of fucked up shit. Then he had to get back up a steep hill. Just like he had to go down the hill, guys, Richard, up the hill. If his phone shows that he was gone, which they said, by 2:30, it's not possible. I'm sorry. It's not fucking possible. Because her phone did not stop for good until 2:32. 2:32, which means if Richard Allen was gone from that area by 2:30, he's not the killer. It's not possible. I just don't believe it. All right, let's go back.
About this in the newsroom. The lack of DNA in this case, does that play a role?
Of course it does.
The jury? And I know you have a lot of experience with this. What's been your experience with a lack of DNA evidence in a case? How much does
And I think they said 11 at 1:30.
Well, it does, of course, depend case to case. But here we have blood at the scene and no reports of blood found later. And the DNA can last for a long time. So when they recover knives and when they search cars that bodies were supposed to or possibly would have been in, or a person who was near the bodies would have been in, the lack of DNA can be very important.
As a defense
Just like with Kohlberger, no DNA. Explain this shit.
attorney, I want to talk to you more about these opening statements and how you might assess the direction that the defense, Richard Allen's defense, could take throughout the remainder of this trial.
Well, they seem to be stressing what will turn into cell phone or tower data possibly from both the girls' phones, one of their phones, and maybe Mr. Allen's phone, because they're saying that they can show a timeline doesn't add up. And the way you do that is with cell tower data and cell phone data.
And how reliable is that evidence to a jury?
Well, the reliability of those types of data are very, very good because it's third-party data.
That's right. We're not talking about just the cell tower data. We're talking about the geolocations on the phones. This shit can literally put you exactly where you're at. Does that make sense? Like this, tracking you by this is way different than tracking you via cell phone tower. That's the difference.
Nothing that the parties control.
Yeah, and really what it comes down to is planting that seed of reasonable doubt among those jurors, because you're not necessarily trying to prove Richard Allen's innocence. You're just trying to prove that he's not guilty in this situation.
Right, and you would like to prove that he couldn't have done it as well.
That's right.
All right, well, thank you so much,
You would
John,
like to. You would definitely like to. Okay, so that's number one. Now we're going to go. By the way, the judge, here's another fucked up thing. The judge rules that the composite sketch. I want you to understand what this judge has already done. The oldest argument can't be made, which I kind of agree with that because that was a crazy theory. But not just that, the sketches are inadmissible. Make that shit make sense.
Hey, good evening, Chelsea. Yeah, it was a long day of day one of this trial. Court just wrapped up within the past hour, began at 9 o'clock this morning. Several family members of Abby and Libby both testified today, including Libby's sister, her father, her grandmother, as well as Abby's mother. Now, in its opening this morning, the prosecution said for the very first time that Richard Allen confessed to details that only the killer would know in those jailhouse phone calls
We need to hear those. We need to hear that.
he made, while the defense says there is no evidence that links Allen to the crime.
That's right.
Carroll County Prosecutor Nicholas McClelland told the packed courtroom his case is focused on three things: bridge guy, a bullet, and the brutal murder of two young girls. He described
That is so little evidence. That's even less evidence than Brian Kohlberger.
that brutal murder, telling the jury that Libby was found naked in the woods, covered in blood, with her throat slashed multiple times.
That's even less evidence than Brian Kohlberger. Fuck, Brian Kohlberger's touch DNA they claim was at least at the fucking scene.
Abby was partially clothed, her throat slit as well. McClelland says Richard Allen is Bridge Guy, the man who he says pulled out a gun and forced the two best friends down the hill before killing them. The prosecutor saying a witness described Allen on the trail that February day in 2017, saying, quote, he looked like he just slaughtered a pig.
No, that's not what the witness said. The witness for 2 straight years said he was just covered in mud. Then in 2019, and now, the very confrontational witness, Hit Dog Hollers, remember, is saying he was slaughtered like a pig. Look, he slaughtered a pig, right?
Pig.
Right.
McClelland's biggest piece of evidence is a bullet found between the girls' bodies that he says match
in the dirt that they had to use special equipment to find.
Is Richard Allen's gun. When defense attorney Andrew Baldwin began his opening, he called it a, quote, magic bullet.
That's right.
Questioned the analysis done by Indiana State Police.
That's
but
right.
A lot of his focus was on a hair found in Abby's hand when her body was discovered, a fact that wasn't revealed until jury selection earlier this week. Baldwin says investigators are now, quote, scrambling to find out who it belongs to, saying in the nearly 8 years of this investigation, it was never tested.
In 8 years? Let this fucking sink into your brains, your little snack cake fueled brains. 7 years. Not a single test ran on the hair that was on the dead kid's body. Bro.
The defense telling the court it possibly belongs to a female member.
How would you know if you didn't test the motherfucker?
Of Libby's family. When Libby's grandmother, Becky Patty, took the stand after opening arguments, Baldwin asked her if she provided DNA to investigators 2 days ago. She said yes. Becky was asked about and described the day the girls went missing and when their bodies were found the next day, getting emotional as she described the coroner's van pulling up to the trail.
Damn.
Some of those details, Max, and we know that that's kind of what you're going to be expecting to hear over the next several weeks throughout this trial. On day one of testimony, several people took the stand, as you know, many of whom were family members. What did the family testify about, and would you say there were any significant moments today?
Yeah, so the family members really testified about the day that the girls went missing, February 13th, 2017. They also testified about where they were, what happened, sort of went through the motions of what happened on February 14th, 2017, when the girls' bodies were found. I would have to say one of the most significant things that happened today, or one of the most, was when the family members were testifying about, for example, Libby's grandmother was testifying about the last time that she saw her walk out the door. Got very emotional.
It's sad, of course.
Up there on the stand. Abby Williams' mother, Anna Williams, she was
Sad
just asked
shit.
to describe her daughter. It was one of the very first questions almost when she got up to the stand, and she had to take about 15 to 20 seconds to collect herself before.
This is also why I'm able to look at these cases different than y'all, man. I don't get emotionally tied to this shit. All this sob story shit, all the boo-hoo shit, maybe last moments, that's for you lady, that's for the snack cakers. Me, I'm just looking at this shit, trying to figure it out. It's a game of Clue to me. That way I can move on to PlayStation and go do something else.
Answering. So very emotional testimony, and unfortunately likely only to continue.
And Max, really quickly, we know Richard Allen is in the courtroom hearing all this testimony and listening to the allegations that have been made against him. Just kind of walk us through his demeanor throughout all of this day one today.
Yeah, today he was pretty stoic, mostly just listened to what these people were saying. There were really no damning details really that came from the testimony from the family members.
Well, there couldn't be.
His biggest reaction, I would have to say, was when the prosecution was making their opening arguments this morning, basically saying, walking through saying he is Bridge Guy, saying he kidnapped the girls, killed them, did these horrible things to him. He was shaking his head no the entire time.
Good shit, Richard Allen. He said it like, nah, that wasn't me. And there's no evidence it was him. None.
Basically saying, no, that wasn't me.
That's right.
Max Lewis reporting live for us
That's
tonight.
right.
He's covered this case for several years for us, and we look forward to hearing more of his coverage over the next month. Thanks, Max. Also today, the judge ruled that sketches that have been part of this investigation for years will not be allowed to be introduced at the trial.
Not allowed at the trial. Now, you got to remember, man, that These sketches were taken in 2 very long periods of time. I believe they were taken, these were made after the Bridge Guy video was released, because I think the Bridge Guy video was released 2 days after, I don't remember. But look at the young guy with the fluffy hair. Makes sense, doesn't it? All of these guys have longer hair. Show me a Richard Allen image where he had long hair.
State police released the first sketch in July of 2017.
There's pictures on his wife that was on his wife's Facebook. Show me any of it. Now, I admit the one on the left looks a little bit more like Richard Allen, but if you really think about it, it's only because we're looking at the goatee.
They released the second one you see here in April 2019. The prosecution filed a motion asking the judge to keep those sketches out of the trial, saying they were investigative tools that would simply confuse the jurors. The defense...
Yeah, it would confuse the jurors because it's fucking crazy. This is what these sketches are made based on eyewitness testimony, which we're hearing in the case is all goofy and shit. The descriptions didn't even match Bridge Guy or Richard Allen.
Argued the sketches would show the panel the drawings don't resemble Allen.
Right.
Judge Gull approved the state's motion opposing those sketches, so they will not be presented before the jury.
You see what's happening?
The defense plans to focus on the lack of the DNA and the investigation against Allen. Our legal analyst joined us in the last hour, and he says the importance of DNA varies from case to case.
No!
But here we have blood at the scene, and no reports of blood found later. And DNA can last for a long time. So when they recover knives and when they search cars that bodies were supposed to or possibly would have been in, or a person who was near the bodies would have been in, the lack of DNA can be very important.
Yeah, I think it is very important, actually. So let's continue on.
You ask though.
They talk about the Delphi community begins to feel the impact of the Allen trial.
On any Indiana Main Street, how it's changed over the years, and they'd probably bring up physical things, storefronts, and people, but no others have changed so rapidly and in the same way as Delphi's. Purple and blue ribbons, small stickers here and there, quietly decorate downtown, as some who call it home worry 2 names will be lost in all the noise over at the courthouse: Abby Williams and Libby German. Residents didn't want to go on camera today, telling us they're just ready for closure. A few no media allowed signs can also be found taped to windows, all because the city was thrust into a new reality where its name is synonymous with tragedy to the rest of the country. It's also one that for at least the next month, downtown businesses fear will affect their livelihoods because regular customers don't want to deal with the swarm of reporters either.
That's true.
The warnings haven't lessened the impact of our collective presence here, though. Someone who works on Main Street said to me, if this is just day 1 of the trial, imagine what day 21 will bring. So as people caught in the periphery wish to step out of the spotlight and move on, 2 families long even more for justice that's 7 years overdue.
I can't blame
13-year-old Abby is remembered as a young artist, athlete, and saxophone player who loved spending time in nature and with animals. Her 14-year-old best friend Libby is remembered for her keen sense of humor, adventurous and sporty spirit, also a saxophone player like Abby. The pair would have been college age today.
Damn.
Instead, they leave behind an indelible mark on the history of a place where they started to grow up, but didn't get to finish.
That's sad.
In Delphi, Scarlett O'Hara, CBS 4 News.
That is sad as fuck when you think about it, right?
Jenny Drasler picks up.
So now we're going to keep going. Legal analyst discussing opening statements, witness testimony. I think we've already seen enough of that. I think it's the same witness.
Coverage tonight. She sat down with our legal expert to break down the twists and turns from today and what comes next.
All right, John Tompkins, thank you so much for joining us here. And starting off, how important are these opening statements in shaping a jury's perception of this case from the very start?
Well, opening statements are always important. In longer trials, they're even more important because the jury will know where you want them to pay special attention. They'll know what to be looking for, what's coming up, and when certain witnesses or certain types of evidence start being introduced, the lawyers can go back to keywords and phrases they used in the opening statement to sort of remind the jurors subliminally, here comes something really important.
Yep.
What are your thoughts overall on the prosecution, how they started this off, and the witnesses they called, really honing in on the family? What are the pros and cons of choosing that route to start that questioning?
Well, that's pretty standard, actually, in murder trials. You have to establish the life of the people who passed away.
That's true.
At the beginning, to show that it was an actual person who was later killed. And so you do bring family members in, pictures showing them in life, so the jury knows they were living people. And then you risk going a little overboard if you try to tug on the sympathy or heartstrings.
Yeah.
And that's always a fine line.
Does the lack of DNA play a role in swaying a jury? I mean, you have a lot of experience in things like this. What has been your experience in a case, and particularly even this case, where there really isn't a lot of DNA here?
We all know about cases where they recovered DNA 20 years later. So there's no excuse in saying, well, we didn't find DNA 3 years later when we got around to searching his car. He must have bleached it or cleaned it or something like that.
Yep.
They have knives that they recovered. That's the kind of thing that could stick out to a jury because of the way these girls were killed.
Based on opening statements, how much you assess the direction the defense is likely to take throughout this trial?
They're clearly not trying to disprove the state's case. They will probably be in a position at the end to say, yes, somebody did exactly what the state said, but we've shown you it wasn't Mr. Allen.
I think it's a great defense.
Based on the times that he was in certain places and the times that he was gone from the area of the bridge, he could not have been the person who did it.
And if they can prove that
next week,
I think we'll probably start getting into the real meat and potatoes of the state's case. They are going to start bringing in the people to set up the actual timeline of the day, to show how they can prove where the girls were and when they were there. They'll start getting in the evidence of the phones. They'll start getting in the evidence of the forensics and the analysis of the recovered grounds.
And they did. And they did. So we still got a few ways to go here.
What will be the first of...
Okay, here comes the next day. Day 2 testimony includes the former Delphi police chief and members of the search party.
Several Saturday half sessions, jurors heard from 3 witnesses, the former police chief of Delphi and 2 searchers who went out to find the girls who were missing after taking a Monday afternoon walk along the Monon High Bridge outside of town. When Abby and Libby took a day off from school to walk the Monon High Bridge some 60 feet above Deer Creek on February 13,
look at the steepness of everything. You think somebody's going to do all that doesn't know the fucking area?
Accosted by Bridge Guy, captured here on video from
Libby's
cell phone, who ordered the girls. Investigators say Bridge Guy followed Libby and Abby to the south end of the Monon High Bridge, where they were forced down to the creek bed. Searcher Jacob Johns testified that he walked the south side banks of Deer Creek for hours Tuesday morning until, after passing under the bridge, he described another searcher spotted possible footprints and disturbed rocks leading down the incline to the creek side, as if someone had scrambled down the hill. Then Johns and Shane Hapgood found a tie-dyed shirt belonging to one of the girls hung up on tree roots in the creek. Meanwhile, another witness, Pat Brown, told jurors that he received word that something had been found in the creek. So he started walking south from Morning Heights Cemetery on the creek's north side and stumbled on the site of the girls' bodies. I thought they were mannequins, he told jurors, and then as his voice cracked, Brown testified he called out to the other searchers, "We found them." Brown said he then called Delphi police with his find and turned his back on the scene. Witnesses are expected to testify that they saw a man who wore clothes similar to Allen's that day, who was walking along a nearby country road with pants that appeared either muddy, as he had been in a creek, or bloody, as if he had just committed a crime. Getting the jurors off just before noon, Judge Frangal said that when they come back to work Monday morning, they will hear the lengthy testimony of a prosecution witness, indicating quite possibly in the witness stand we will hear from a law enforcement officer who would have been among the first to arrive at the scene and to secure the scene where the girls' bodies were found. In Delphi.
That was day 2. Now we're going to move on to day 3, which included the graphic crime scene photos We'll talk about this as well.
3 of the Delphi murders trial is underway with a focus on witnesses describing the crime scene where Libby German and Abby Williams were found almost 8 years ago. One big headline that came out just before court today concerns over one of the most notable pieces of evidence we've had in this case. This video of a man near the Monon High Bridge taken from Libby's phone. Meanwhile, CBS 4's Russ McQuaid spent the morning in the courtroom hearing about the graphic details of this murder scene. Russ, what have you heard?
And good afternoon, Melissa. Our day started. We had 2 witnesses this morning. The first one, Deputy Darren Giancarlo. He's of the Carroll County Sheriff's Department. He was the first lawman to arrive on the scene after volunteer civilian searchers found the bodies of Libby and Allie on the Deer Creek, not far from the Monon High Trail, on February 14, 2017. Giancarlo choked up a little bit as he described to the jurors what he saw when he walked up on the scene and saw the bodies of the 2 girls. Then we heard extensive testimony from Sergeant Jason Page. He is a crime scene investigator for Indiana State Police. He was the main investigator. He talked about how he came down from County Road 300 North, just down from Morning Heights Cemetery, discovered the girls' bodies perhaps 20 to 20-some yards up from the north bank of Deer Creek. He cordoned off an area the size of a football field as a crime scene in general. He narrowed that down to a 30-foot diameter around the bodies of the girls. The jurors saw some 42 photographs that he took out there that day and the next day.
That's not an easy hike
of the bodies of the girls
to get up
of the
there.
crime scene. When you look at those, and these are sketches, or
they said it was 20 feet up the bank.
Photographs the general public has never seen. Libby German is lying on her back on one side. She is not clothed. One hand is resting up against a tree, and you can tell from the photographs in a close-up that there is blood covering her face from the neck wounds, the slashing wounds on her throat that took her life. Then, arranged or just set off to the side in almost a V pattern, probably 3 to 5 feet away, is the body of Abby Williams. Abby is clothed. We've been told she was wearing Libby's clothes at the time when the bodies were discovered. Those clothes did appear to be damp and wet, and on both girls, you could see that someone had gone to a great deal of effort to arrange and cover them with sticks and branches. Now, these are more than just sticks. These are branches.
Takes time.
One of them significantly, I would guesstimate the size of the diameter almost of a coffee can. These sticks had been arranged, and they weren't just tossed on willy-nilly as if to cover up the bodies to be shielded from view, but rather in a direction in V's and geometric patterns, and they were across both bodies. Just from a layman's point of view, from looking at that, it looks like Abby's body was treated, such as it was, at a murder crime scene with more respect than Libby's body was.
Damn.
And we were all in that courtroom this morning with both the family and the jurors as we all took a look at those photographs for the first time.
Now, Russ, just hearing you explain that is challenging for me to listen to, so I'm sure seeing the images is more challenging. The judge has said this would be one of the hardest days for the jury. What is it like being in that courtroom?
Well, the family is in there. The families of Abby Williams, Libby German, and even Richard Allen's family sat right in front of me. I do know and understand that the victim's family have seen these photographs before. It doesn't make it any easier, but they do know what to expect. I was looking at the jurors. The jurors were studying intently the large video monitor that the photographs were displayed on. It was a very somber mood in the courtroom. You could feel a few people gasp slightly when they spotted, and of course those are a lot of folks from the back rows that are social media and members of the public who are attending. I had my eyes on Richard Allen. Richard Allen has been sitting, as he is, at the defense table, perhaps 10 to 12 feet from the video screen, right up in the front of the room, staring intently, his hand on his chin, looking at that screen, and wearing his glasses up on top of his head. So perhaps he has seen these photographs for one of only the first times, or, as the prosecution claims, he is triggering what he saw the day he was allegedly out there on February 13th, 2017.
All right, Russ, reporting live for us from outside the courthouse. We're going to hear from you later today with more on what happens this afternoon. Now, like we mentioned, there's been a motion today concerning that video taken on Libby's phone, which investigators say may show the killer giving orders to the girls.
Well, they ended up seeing the phone.
Prosecutors argue that Richard Allen looks like the man in the video, but the defense argues it's too grainy to tell. And they believe having anyone testify over the video or audio would be, in their eyes, speculation.
That's exactly what it would be. It is grainy, and you don't see his lips move. There's no guarantee that the audio even came from Bridge Guy.
Now, that's up for the judge to decide.
So, I mean, there's no telling.
Let's see what graphic crime scene photos revealed in the Delphi murders trial. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Bob Donaldson.
And I'm Chelsea Helms. Those pictures show Libby German and Abby Williams when they were found dead near the Monon High Bridge back in 2017. CBS 4's Russ McQuaid was in the courtroom when they were shown to jurors, and we just want to warn you, you may find some of the details in this story disturbing.
This is not the first time the families or the defense team have seen these photographs, but it is the first time for the public and reporters and for the jurors to look and see the graphic evidence of what must have been a horrendous crime scene there on February 13th and or 14th of 2017 when the bodies of Abby Williams and Libby German were discovered. But the defense argued in afternoon cross-examination with the state police investigator, if you were so intent on photographing the crime scene, why don't we see any photographs of the removal of what is called the magic bullet, the bullet that is found semi-buried in the ground?
Why don't we see any video or photos of you removing the bullet, motherfucker? You took all these photos of the crime scene. Exactly.
That investigators pulled out and said matches the gun found at Richard Allen's house. The families of Abby and Libby arrived at court this morning, as did attorneys representing Richard Allen. This is Allen's family outside the courthouse during a lunch break. Special Judge Fran Gull presided over testimony offered by the first Carroll County Sheriff's deputy who arrived on the scene and choked up as he described finding the bodies of Libby and Abby in a rolling floodplain less than 20 yards off the north bank of Deer Creek. Then an Indiana State Police crime scene investigator narrated some 40 photographs he took of the woods that day, including close-up depictions of the two girls, one portraying the wounds to Libby's nude body, the other showing Abby just a few feet away, wearing her friend's clothes, damp as if the children had been forced across the creek before being killed, and covered with sticks.
Man.
The state police investigator...
So if the clothes were damp already, so did they make them change clothes before they crossed the river or after? When was all this done? Like, you see my point? This takes time. Like, that just seems like really wild to me.
Said, by the way, they did not collect those sticks that were laid across the two girls' bodies.
Oh, that's right. They didn't test the sticks for DNA either.
Because he said, frankly, we've never been able to get good DNA hits off of such rough, natural wood surfaces. Meanwhile, the defense, in a contentious cross-examination, once again drilled down on the state police investigators, not documenting where they found that bullet, or they did find it, but not pulling it out of the ground to show if it was in a pristine condition, trying to throw doubts on that, what they call the magic bullet. And hopefully it'll be enough to convince jurors that there should be some reasonable...
That's right, because if that bullet had been buried for fucking months, you could have been able to tell that shit. But if it was in pristine condition, yeah, it sounds like it would be that day.
Doubt about the chain of evidence and the evidence that has been arrayed against Richard Allen in Delphi.
Crazy shit. Crazy shit. We're going to go to day 4.
The Delphi murders trial Monday was full of emotional and graphic testimony about how investigators found the bodies of Abby Williams and Libby German. Today has continued to focus on the evidence collected at the scene. CBS 4's Max Lewis was in the courtroom all morning long for us. And Max, a lot was covered here in the past few hours.
Yeah, quite a bit, Melissa. The crime scene investigator, the lead crime scene investigator, took the witness stand again today. He began his testimony last night, but then the court recessed until this morning. His name is Brian Oley. He was asked about the autopsy of the two girls, which he attended down in Terre Haute. They went through the evidence that was collected during that autopsy, including numerous swabs from several areas of the girls' bodies, as well as the clothes,
which had no Richard Allen DNA,
that Abby had on, and rape kits that were done on both of those girls. Now, there was no...
which clearly didn't have Richard Allen, or we would know that.
No mention in court today about if those rape kits turned up anything of value. But during his cross-examination, defense attorney Brad Rosie went through the list of swabs and repeatedly asked the crime scene investigator if any of them had any DNA that tied Richard Allen to the crime scene. The answer to all of those questions was no. Now, the prosecution eventually objected to that line of questioning because the investigator was not the one who actually did the test. Just
if we're going to discuss DNA, we need to discuss if it connects the fucking suspect to it or not.
Judge Gall agreed, and attorney Rosie moved on. Now, a lot of the focus today with the crime scene investigators yesterday and today really has been on the bullet that was found between the girls' bodies, which the prosecution alleges matches a gun owned by Richard Allen. Now, as we learned yesterday, the investigators only took pictures of the bullet as it was facing down into the ground. There are no...
Only took pictures of the bullet as it was down into the ground.
No pictures, we learned today, outside of those few at the scene. The defense...
No other pictures.
Has really gone hard at that. Attorney Brad Rosie got very confrontational during that line of questioning this morning. He asked the investigator if he would take more pictures if he could do it over again. The investigator answered no, he wouldn't. Now, the other main focus was on the branches that were found on top of the girls' bodies. We all remember that. The crime scene investigators, we learned yesterday, left those branches at the scene. Even though they had blood on them, they determined that they had
blood on them, which is DNA. They didn't test the motherfucking branches. They left it at the crime scene. Can you believe this monkey shit that you're hearing right now?
No evidentiary value. Well, they must have changed their minds because they ended up going back to get those branches a couple days later after being ordered to do so by someone. Attorney Brad Rosie asked the...
And they just happened to remember, oh, we know where the branches are. Nah, don't worry about whether they might have moved it out the way.
Investigators, if he believed that the sticks were placed there to communicate something. The investigator said no and told him he believed they were there to conceal the bodies. However, Rosie pointed out that...
I also agree the sticks were there to conceal the bodies, though.
The sticks did not really do anything to conceal the bodies, and as someone who saw those crime scene photos, you could tell that those sticks really didn't do anything to conceal the bodies. What their intention was, well, I'm not for sure on that. The defense has really, though, been hitting hard today and yesterday, attacking crime scene integrity specifically. But the prosecution has really walked jurors through the process of how evidence is collected, how things are sealed, sent to the lab, all that process. It doesn't appear that the defense's attacks on the crime scene integrity in particular have really been landing with the jury, Melissa.
How would you fucking know? I went into this saying 60 confessions, he did it. I'm not even in the courtroom. Just hearing you guys reporting on it has made me say, oh, shit. By the way, Andrea Burkhart, who has a YouTube channel, she goes there every day, and she does great work from inside Delphi.
Max, now before you go, as you mentioned, there was just a lot covered this morning regarding the evidence and the specifics here to this case, which led to some questions from the jury. Can you explain to us that process and what were some of those questions?
Yeah, so basically at the end of each witness, the prosecution, they're presenting their case first, so they ask the witness the questions. The defense then does their cross-examination. The prosecution has a chance to redirect, as does the defense team. After that, and after they have settled, the judge then asks the jury if they have any questions. Today, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in my time watching this trial, this was the most jury questions that we actually got today. There were 4 of them. They asked things about how evidence is handled.
That's crazy. The jury can ask questions. That's dope, actually.
And they also asked whether or not, some specific questions about the crime scene, whether it appeared that Abby was dressed in Libby's clothes at the crime scene, or if that happened somewhere else. So those were some of the main questions. This jury really listening very intently on what witnesses are saying, Melissa.
And that will continue for the days to come. Max, thank you reporting live for us this afternoon. Now, like we mentioned, Monday's testimony focused on the crime scene near the Monon High Bridge outside Delphi. Jurors heard graphic details about the girls' murder and how their bodies were arranged. The courtroom saw several dozen photos of the girls' bodies posed not far from the water near the trail. The photos also show a collection of tree branches and sticks that were seemingly arranged with intention on top of their bodies. Crime scene investigators say the girls' clothing was damp, and the defense pointed attention to the fact that while there is a photo of the unspent round that's been connected to Richard Allen's gun, there's no photo of investigators collecting that round.
Bingo.
So we'll be back in court this afternoon and bring you full reports on the news at 5 and online.
That's a great fucking point.
Seeing documents and interviews that have been used in the Delphi murders investigations, and these exhibits, they were shown to media in a Fort Wayne courtroom today.
CBS 4's Eric Graves spent hours going through hundreds of pages of documents.
Damn.
For the first time today, we got...
I can't wait till all this shit becomes public, man. And yeah, I'm sorry, I don't care if y'all like it or not. I want to see the autopsy photos. I want to see all that shit. All of it.
A look at Richard Allen's signed confessions to the Delphi double murders. Now, keep in mind, since there were no
Now we're passing around the signed confessions. I want to see the real confessions.
Cameras allowed in the courtroom here behind me in Fort Wayne, this is a rough sketch of what that confession looked like on this Indiana Department of Corrections request for interview. You can see it says, "I am ready to officially confess for killing Abby and Libby. I hope I get the opportunity to tell the families I'm sorry." Then signed with Richard Allen's signature and dated received March 5th, 2023. Now, we do know that Richard Allen has made more than 60 apparent confessions, some to crimes that never happened. Further, those exhibits showed that the Delphi Police Department had an audio DVR error. All of the audio recordings of interviews were taped over up to February 20th, 2017.
All the audios were taped over, dubbed over. Get the fuck out of here.
That is a 6-day window after the girls' bodies were found in that investigation.
Get the fuck out of here.
Into the murders began. The exhibit did not list.
And you know they got that confession note looked like a retard wrote it.
Who those interviews that were taped over were with. On the defense's side of things, those exhibits, more than 24 of them with hundreds of pages of documents, mostly went toward forming their theory around Odinism, and that a group of Odinists were responsible for the killings of Abby and Libby. Multiple depositions and interview notes with people from Delphi and surrounding areas were made public to us today inside the courtroom, but Judge Gola has ordered that theory not be used in the trial happening right now. Further, many of those people that were named have not been mentioned publicly in any court documents or by police. We do expect to see and hear Richard Allen's confessions at some point in this trial.
Yeah,
on
I would
the defense's
imagine.
side of things, they have maintained Richard Allen is an innocent man who was put under undue stress during his time behind bars. Reporting in Fort Wayne, Eric Graves, CBS 4 News.
Okay, we were in the Delphi murders trial.
Here we go. Now the jurors watch video extracted from Libby German's phone.
And audio evidence that the prosecution says links Richard Allen to the killings. Good
Tell
evening,
us
everyone.
how.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Bob Donaldson.
And I'm Chelsea Helms. Allen is
And Bob Donaldson's been on been in Indianapolis doing that shit for fucking my whole life.
accused of killing
My
Abby
whole life.
Williams and Libby German back in 2017. CBS 4's Russ McQuaid was in the courtroom
And
today
Russ McQuaid,
as
now
that
think about
video
it.
was played for jurors.
An Indiana State Police audio and video technician told jurors it was his job to enhance the video that was captured on Libby's cell phone on February 13, 2017, the day she and...
See, to me, if you're enhancing the video, I gotta be honest with you, I think it should make it inadmissible because now you're altering the video. Do you see what I'm saying? How do we know you didn't alter the audio?
Abby Williams were kidnapped and murdered near the Monon High Bridge outside of Delphi. Jeremy Chapman told the jurors that it was his opinion when he looked at that video. What did you see? Quote, 2 girls and a guy walking along a bridge. It is the prosecutor's contention that a suspect who's come to be known as Bridge Guy, his image captured on Libby's cell phone, is the killer of the 2 girls walking along the Monon High Bridge on a day off from school. For the first time, we have a more complete version of that video shown in court this afternoon. We've seen and heard only snippets before, but today prosecutors played 43 seconds of the video. In it, you can see in the distance a man walking on the bridge and Abby in a red shirt. We hear the voice of the man commanding the girls, quote, guys, down the hill. Abby rushes past Libby's cell phone camera, which is pointed to the ground and showing railroad tracks and a gravel path.
Shit.
We hear Libby saying, as if she's responding to a directive, "There's no path here. We've got to go down here," before descending toward the south side bank of Deer Creek. The girls' bodies were found the next day across the creek, some of their clothes in the water. Abby was wearing Libby's clothes that were wet. During the first playing of that tape, Richard Allen, sitting at the defense table, looked plaintively back at his wife Kathy, who was sitting in the row in front of me. Earlier jurors were shown bags of evidence that they were told contained not only those clothes, but also the bullet.
I wonder if the wife thinks it's him, because you would know like your husband's voice. Does that make sense? Like when you're hearing that guys down the hill, you know his mother and wife wouldn't recognize that voice if it was Richard Allen's, and they're still on his side. So do they believe it?
Investigators said they recovered from the location of the bodies that the state claims links Richard Allen and his gun to the killings. Our Max Lewis is still in the courtroom. Today's hearing is still going on. After that hearing, he will be among a select group of reporters who will get an extra chance to go take another look at the evidence that was brought out today, including that video and audio tape, and hopefully give us a better description of what he sees and, more importantly, what he hears that came off of Libby's cell phone the day she and Abby were murdered in 2017 in Delphi.
I wonder if any of this evidence will ever come out. So day 4 did include cross-examination.
This is your news now.
Tonight at 6, we're bringing you updates on the Delphi double murder trial. Thanks for joining us. I'm Chelsea Helms.
And I'm Bob Donaldson. Day 4 of testimony wrapped up less than an hour ago. The focus today, the man on the bridge. CBS 4's Max Lewis was in the courtroom all day. He joins us now live with the latest on today's proceedings. Good evening, Max.
Hey, good evening, Bob and Chelsea. Yeah, really the big thing to come out of this afternoon is that the two sketches that state police did of their suspect during this investigation, you might remember last week the Judge Gold ruled that those sketches could not be used here in trial. But that may be changing because one of the prosecution's witnesses that they called this afternoon was Betsy Blair, who was a woman who was just walking on the trail that day.
Here we go.
Was one of the people who gave a description to state police in order for that sketch, to create that sketch, rather. She mentioned...
Betsy Blair is the one that said fluffy hair. That's why there's that other picture. Yeah, you have to include the pictures.
She was being questioned really about what are some pretty different descriptions of the suspect that she gave to state police versus what Richard Allen actually looked like. She specifically described the person she saw on the bridge that day as boyish in their 20s and 30s with
feminine eyes,
brown poofy hair.
Oh, that was the other
Obviously
one.
Doesn't really fit the description of Richard Allen. And then when she was asked about that by the defense attorney, she said she made that statement when she was comparing the two sketches at the
comparing the two sketches. Throw her testimony out.
End of court today, when the jury was taken out, defense attorney Andrew Baldwin spoke to the judge and said that they believe that they now have grounds that the sketches should be brought back in.
Absolutely,
because,
they should.
Mrs. Blair actually spoke about those. That was one of the big things today.
That was smart by the defense. You get the fucking witness to bring up the sketches? Oh, that was genius by the defense.
One of the other big things was really just witnesses that had been called. There were multiple witnesses, actually, that were called and
fucking genius.
Spoke about what they saw on the bridge that day. But the really big focus of that from the defense attorney's side was actually on the very differing testimonies that they gave about that, actually.
That's
One
right.
of them specifically said that they saw the man on the bridge, or they were walking on the trail, I should say. They saw him, and they said that he was wearing all black pants, black jacket,
You could
a black
see he's
hat,
not-
and had his
no
face
black.
covered with some sort of black mask. So those were very differing, obviously very different.
That's right. The glove don't
descriptions
fit.
of the person that was seen
You
on
must
the
have
trail
quit.
today, that was seen on the bridge that day, than the specific image that we actually got. The other big moment from today, from this afternoon, I should say, is that they actually played the video. We've all known about this video that was on Libby's cell phone where she captured someone saying, allegedly, guys, down the hill. They played the entire video in it, and you could actually hear the girls' voice. The quote they said was, one of the girls said in the video, which was about 43 seconds long, they played for the courtroom, one of the girls said, quote, "There's no path going there, so we must have to go down here." And then at the very end of that video, you hear what sounds like a male's voice, which is what ended up being guys down the hill. However, the defense very quick to pounce on that because one of the forensic analysts at the Indiana State Police testified today who enhances video and audio. We heard the original video. You could clearly tell that the audio of guys down the hill was heavily enhanced in order to get it to the point that we have all heard. They also testified about the video in the picture of Bridge Guy, also heavily enhanced.
That means neither of them are in its original form. That means altered.
This morning's testimony, it was more of basically what we heard yesterday. The crime scene investigator, the lead crime scene investigator, finished up his testimony this morning, testifying about the autopsies of Abby Williams and Libby German. I would say the big moment from that today was that he said he took multiple swabs from the girls' bodies during that autopsy. At one point, the defense attorneys are asking him repeatedly, did this swab have DNA that ties Richard Allen to the crime?
None of them did.
The analysts said
none of them
now
did.
At noon,
let's move to day 5.
Morning testimony in day 5 of the Delphi murders trial has wrapped up, and today jurors heard from the prosecution's best eyewitness to identifying Bridge Guy the day Abby Williams and Libby German were murdered near the Monon High Bridge.
Eyewitness.
But that testimony had mixed results. And CBS 4's Russ McQuaid was in the courtroom. He joins us now live with the very latest. Russ?
And a good afternoon, Melissa. Sarah Carbaugh testified she was driving down.
Sarah Carbaugh was the one that was feuding with going back and forth with the defense.
County Road 300 North at about 4 o'clock on the afternoon of February.
At 4 o'clock, she claimed she was going down that road. Keep in mind that if Richard Allen's cell phone shows that he wasn't there, you got to throw all this shit out.
13th, 2017, when she spotted Bridge Guy, covered with mud and blood, or maybe not.
Damn!
Sarah Carbaugh came out of the witness stand to demonstrate for jurors how she saw Bridge Guy walking hunched over and plodding along, his hands buried in his pockets with blood on his shoes and lower pant legs, and mud all over, as if he had fallen down a hill or in a creek, she said. At first, Carbaugh was effective, directly addressing the jury and calmly explaining what she saw that day. But under cross-examination,
she got fucked
up. She admitted to suffering from trauma and anxiety over the Delphi killing and her accounts.
I went through so much trauma and anxious, I don't remember, and I just... Right.
Became combative and sarcastic towards the defense team as to whether she recalled seeing blood on Bridge Guy during her earliest interviews with police, and whether her account was persuaded or colored by law enforcement as she was questioned. And she even admitted that 90 minutes of one interview had been lost, and, quote, "That's not my fault."
I mean, she's right.
Carbaugh never pointed to Richard Allen at the defense table. Right. She never said that the defendant was Bridge Guy that day. She said she drove past this person at about 30, 35 miles an hour, got as close as 3 feet from him as she drove past, but she never said Richard Allen was Bridge Guy.
That's right.
Meanwhile, jurors right now are listening to the pathologist who conducted the autopsies on the bodies of Abby Williams and Libby German. He said that both girls died of deep lacerations or slashing wounds across their throats. He said there was no evidence of any sexual assault trauma done to Abby's body.
No sexual, no assault.
Now, Russ, you mentioned the video interview with that witness was lost. Can you explain how that happened and how that impacts the trial?
Well, this isn't...
Well, it makes her look like a liar, that's what.
The first time that the prosecution has come into this case with its hands tied behind its back. We've had several occasions. One, you've got to remember Richard Allen's original interview with law enforcement was lost in the system for 5.5 years before a non-law enforcement employee got into the files, read it, pulled it out, and gave it to investigators. Over the summer, we heard that interviews done at the Delphi police headquarters in the early days of this investigation, February of 2017, disappeared off the DVR system when it was into the permanent record mode.
Of course they did.
Nobody knew that for 6 months. Sarah Carbaugh said her original interview would have been within that time window. She said today from the witness stand, I wanted to prepare and watch my old interviews back again to refresh my memory, but that interview has been lost, and we can only assume it was another one of those DVR malfunctions at the Delphi Police Department. So the prosecution, some of its witnesses yesterday really didn't stand up to their explanations of what they saw and the timetable of what they...
I don't see any of the witnesses saying Richard Allen did this. I don't see any evidence saying Richard Allen did this at this point in time.
They saw, and the defense is obviously hoping that mentally the jurors are keeping track of this. You make one mistake, okay, you make two mistakes, it starts adding up. As for instance, this week when they said, remember those bodies and the sticks on the girls' bodies in the woods? On the first day, even though those sticks had blood on them, the investigators didn't think they were important enough to recover as evidence. Then they were sent back 2 weeks later, or 2 days later. Yeah,
Richard Allen's innocent,
sticks.
man.
We need those again. The defense is hoping that the jurors keep that in mind.
Richard Allen is fucking innocent at this point.
Eyewitnesses and expert testimony
Check
today
this out.
in
We
the
have
Delphi
more.
double murder trial. Thanks for joining us. I'm Chelsea Helms.
And I'm Bob Donaldson. More revelations in court today as witnesses appeared, including a pathologist, a state expert on cell phones, and a witness for the prosecution. CBS 4's Russ McQuaid has the very latest now from the Carroll County Courthouse.
Indiana State Police First Sergeant Chris Cecil explained to the jurors that he was in charge of examining the video and the data on Libby German's cell phone that afternoon, February 13th, 2017. And not only what he saw, but also what the data on that phone tells us about the last few minutes of the lives of the two girls. Cecil testified that analysis of cell phone data puts Libby and Abby on the Monon High Bridge at 2:05 p.m. that day. At 2:14 p.m., Libby shot the video of her friend on the bridge and in the distance, the man known as Bridge Guy, the girl's killer. That video runs for 43 seconds. We can see Bridge Guy, perhaps even hear his voice, as well as that of Libby, seemingly as she responds to his orders, and she says, "We've got to go down here." At 2:31 p.m., an app on the phone records a change in the phone's elevation, likely meaning that was recorded as the girls were either being marched down to Deer Creek or up the opposite bank where their bodies were found the next.
Think about how long that process is. That is 17 minutes from 2:14 to 2:31. Do you hear what I'm saying? And then it stops 8 minutes later. So at 2:14, the Bridge Guy video, guys down the hill. And then at 2:31, 17 minutes later, it starts moving and then stops 8 minutes later. So we're looking at 17 minutes plus 8 minutes. Was that 25 minutes? 25 minutes. Just till the phone stopped moving? Think about that. 25 minutes until the phone stops moving. That's a long time, man. That's a long, anybody that hikes knows that usually an average pace is about 2 miles an hour, 3 miles an hour. We'll go 2. That's almost a mile when you're looking at essentially 25 minutes. But they weren't found a mile away. That's a long time to get a very short distance from the hill.
Day. At 2:39 p.m., that phone, later discovered under Abby's body, never moves again. At 4:06 p.m., a text message comes in from Libby's grandmother, Becky Patty, and it reads, quote, "You need to call me now." Within 6 hours, the phone ran out of power, though it did spike on briefly at 4:30 in the morning the next day. and that was about 8 hours before the girls' bodies were
How's
found.
that even possible?
Earlier today, the jurors heard from Sarah Carbaugh.
How is that
she
possible?
was driving a car on County Road 300.
How is that possible that the phone powered down and then all them hours later just comes alive with 15 messages? And do you see what I'm saying? How?
100 North just...
I know that when my phone dies, the only way to power it back on is if I plug it back up. Unless it was turned off. Something about that doesn't feel right.
Off of the
At all.
property where the Monon High Bridge Trail is. That's where she says she saw Bridge Guy. He was covered in mud as if he'd fallen down a hill or fallen into a creek. She said she even spotted blood on his shoes. They also heard from the pathologist who conducted the autopsies on Libby and Abby's bodies. He determined that while they had both been slashed across the throats, there was no evidence of any violent sexual assault injuries.
Which is good.
The testimony of the phone expert continues this afternoon. In Delphi, Russ McQuaid, CBS 4 News.
Here we
5:30
go.
testimony just finished for the day in the Delphi murders trial. There was wide-ranging testimony today from experts and witnesses alike.
CBS 4's Max Lewis just got out of the courtroom. He joins us live from outside the courthouse. Max, what really stuck out to you today?
It'll give us an afternoon, I would say.
Hey, good evening, Chelsea and Bob. Yeah, I just got out of the court. We recessed just a little bit ago, probably about 10 minutes ago. I think the big thing from today, or I should start with the most recent development, really, is that we heard from a digital forensics expert at Indiana State Police, or the person who actually analyzed the data that was found on Libby's cell phone.
Right.
There were some really important moments in establishing sort of the timeline of how this all happened, because that has really been the contentious point of all of this, is exactly when were the girls on the bridge? When did they go down the hill? When were they killed? Some of those questions still remain unanswered. They used the data specifically on Libby's phone from the Health app. Libby had an iPhone. Most people with iPhones know there's this Health app, and it actually tracks movement.
Right.
And so they were able to discover that the last movement on that phone was at 2:32 that afternoon.
Which means if they can prove Richard Allen and his phone was out of there before 2:30, this case will be dismissed.
The last movement was an elevation change. It described an elevation change of 2 floors, which they testified was about 20 feet. So that possibly could be the down the hill part. However, the expert could not say if that was an upward elevation change or a downward.
Well, that can't be the down the hill part, because ultimately that video was filmed, the down the hill video was filmed 17 minutes before that.
Elevation change. The other big thing that really they lasered in on was the Snapchat data. Remember, the girls were out there.
Yeah.
They were posting pictures on Snapchat. They posted several pictures. The last one they posted was of Libby walking across the bridge. You may have seen it sort of floating around there on the internet. For some reason, the digital forensics expert could not find that picture on Libby's cell phone, adding up.
What? 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 Wasn't on Libby's cell phone.
A little bit of mystery to all of this. They also revealed that they seized 23 devices from Richard Allen's home. All of those devices were tested, and the expert testified that there was no data on any of those devices that tied him to Abby Williams or Libby German or...
BAM! 23 devices studied from Richard Allen, nothing. Who deleted the fucking Snapchat data? Oh, man.
To the murders of the girls. However, an important note on that is that they did not test the device because he didn't have it, the cell phone that he actually had in 2017. The day kicked off, though, with more eyewitness testimony. Remember, we heard some yesterday. This was from a woman who was driving along the road near the trail who says that she saw Bridge Guy walking along the road. She described him to investigators as muddy and bloody. This was a very contentious witness
eyewitness testimony, because when defense attorney Andrew Baldwin got up to question her, he pointed out that in her first 2 statements to police, in the first 2
just
interviews
muddy,
she did
just
with
muddy.
police, she'd never said bloody.
Right.
She did not describe the man as being bloody. She only described him as being muddy. She claims that she said it in the second interview, but then admitted that the video of that interview was, quote, missing. There's no
But they had the transcript, though.
explanation for that. She did do a third interview with police where it is recorded in the transcripts that she called him bloody, but in that third interview, she did not describe him
as muddy.
And then and more heartbreaking stuff about around midday was when the forensic pathologist who did the autopsies on Abby and Libby testified. The autopsy photos were shown in the courtroom. Of course, very disturbing. Just like the crime scene photos we saw in recent days, you could see some of the jurors not even wanting to look at the photos. They kept looking down, would glance up for a moment, but then would kept looking down. The important notes from that testimony from the forensic pathologist is that they cannot determine when the girls were killed. There's no time of death,
no time of death. They can't tell you when they were killed. So they might have been moved from the scene.
Determination on that. I will say from seeing the photos, Abby, I should say, only had 1 slit on her throat, while Libby had 3 very large gashes on her throat. The big things to come out also was that they cannot tell what kind of weapon made those slashes, and they cannot tell how many weapons were used to make those slashes. There was some
cannot tell what kind of weapon or how many weapons.
Disagreement on whether or not the knife used on Libby specifically was
the same one
knife, while the one on Abby was smooth. But again, the forensic pathologist could not testify to what type of knives, or I should say weapons, were used and how many weapons were used, drawing quite a bit more doubt on some of the findings. The other thing is there was no really any major DNA findings on their bodies that we heard of today. Sexual assault kits were also done on the girls. That did not really turn up anything. The forensic pathologist said there was no signs of any major sexual trauma. So quite a bit of testimony, another day of learning quite a few things that we didn't know.
Man!
Of course, court, we should do that tomorrow as well.
Richard Allen, this case is falling apart, man.
Well, court picks back up tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Bob and Chelsea.
Well, Max, very quickly, there were some questions that were raised in each one of those instances that you brought up. Questions about the murder weapon, questions about the timeline from the cell phone, and also questions about that witness testimony, correct?
Yes, there were quite a few questions. I mean, the defense, really pointed out the inconsistencies in the statement from the eyewitness, which is the same thing we saw yesterday. Not a single eyewitness who saw Bridge Guy on the trail that day or near the trail that day really had a solid description that was maintained throughout the years. The big questions on the murder weapon obviously came when they were asking the forensic pathologist in his initial report said that he believed it was a serrated knife that was used on Libby, but then he has now changed that and said he cannot say exactly what type of weapon.
Changing his story again, man. It sounds like the prosecution, everybody's changing their story.
That was. So that was a big question.
Over and over.
The forensics, the big questions were about mostly Richard Allen's devices and the ones that they were seized from his home. 23 devices altogether. Again, defense attorney Jennifer Auger went through the list. Did any of these connect to Abby Williams? No. Did any of them connect Richard Allen to Libby German? No. Did any of these devices connect Richard Allen to the murders of Abby and Libby?
No.
The answer was no.
Bam!
And I think a lot of jurors probably asking that question of, if we don't have a definitive timeline of when these girls died, how can we pin the case to the man who the state is saying did this crime?
And in fairness, much more testimony to come. We're only on day 5. All
Ah.
right, Max, thank you for that.
Man, Richard Allen.
We'll bring you updates on
Richard Allen fucking it up. Ladies and gentlemen. Woo! Richard Allen is innocent. Or at least so far it looks that way. They ain't got shit. Their whole case is falling apart. Let me know what you guys think, guys. Let me know in the comments section. If you like what I do here, you find my content value, I just dropped an 1.5 hour long video for y'all. Join the Gun Squad. Hit those links down below. I love you guys. But let me know what you guys think if you made it all the way through this video. Man. I'll see you guys next time.